So, Warlords of Draenor is coming to a close. We're guessing the Legion beta soon, and there are no more major or even minor content patches coming for this expansion, besides the mandatory pre-expansion patch for Legion. What I would love to do is take a look back at WoD, objectively, from its launch until now, finding both its merits and its flaws, and see if it was really the bad expansion it's said to be, or if that's just simply remembering the prior expansions more fondly than they deserve. Before I get into this, I need to give a disclaimer that although I'm trying to be as objective as possible, naturally there'll be some things that are skewed to my point of view when playing. If you think differently about something I say, leave a comment and create a discussion with myself and everyone else who watched the video. But before that, sit back, relax, and enjoy reflecting on Warlords of Draenor. WoD was Blizzard's most hyped up expansion. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing PR for this thing. The return of WoW. It was like the Warcraft equivalent of a WoW killer. Everything from ads on TV to impaling taxis with replicas of Gorehowl in Times Square. Blizzard was really trying to push as much new blood and returning players to WoD as they could. And well, it paid off. On the release, WoW jumped up to 10 million subscribers from 7.5 million at the end of MOP, which is much more than the usual new expansion spike. And then... oh no. What happened? Well, from a technical standpoint, the launch was a disaster. Because there was no new race or class, pretty much every single player from the same faction per server was funneled into the same zone, and the game was trying to create an individual instance for every single player to create their garrison, which, surprise surprise, bugged out. NPCs not spawning, players not being able to use any kind of abilities or items, and if you tried to escape you just end up walking around an unrendered map. On launch, if you so much as went near your garrison, you would become stuck and have to Alt F4 and re-enter the server queue in the hopes of spawning at a graveyard. Which is crazy since the garrison system was meant to be an integral part of leveling. On the NA servers this was fixed relatively quickly, but for the EU it was a nightmare. Players were stranded without any kind of fix to the situation for days. Once you got past the garrison bugs though, the leveling experience was actually fantastic. The zones were beautiful and unique, with fleshed out stories. The new outposts gave players different paths to choose for leveling, as well as a really cool zone specific ability. Exploration was encouraged with the revamped rares and treasure system with spawns that could be shared between players. Bonus objectives, though they seemed stale, served their purpose well as a deviation from questing, and even half the zones had a really cool, huge, plot-advancing cinematic in the finale. The Talador cutscene was my favourite. It had me literally at the edge of my seat, and after watching it I felt excitement and a drive to enter Blackrock Foundry and kill Blackhand.
Fire. Such arrogance. To believe that you alone could defeat me.
Together.
Wait! They're alive!
I've got them.
Just you.
Then we hit 100, and we are confronted with 5 new things to do. Garrison missions, a Tectus dailies, reputation, Ashran, and the legendary questline, along with normal and heroic dungeons. At a first glance, this seems like a good amount of content for a freshly capped player. First you send off your garrison missions, then you go do your Tectus daily quest, and from there, depending on what your main path in the game is, you could go to Ashran, reputations, or the legendary questline. Now, I've never stepped foot in Ashran. In fact, the only time I ever did PvP was to get a transmog sword for my monk. But it doesn't take a 2k plus rated player to understand that Ashran was a joke amongst the PvP community. I tried to find some reasons as to why it failed on forums, but I feel that by trying to interpret it, all I'd be doing is misrepresenting something I don't understand for a community I don't take part in. I think the fact that the PvP section of the MMO Champion forums being completely devoid of anything Ashran related is testament to its failure. Reputations was something that Blizzard either admitted or tagged on at the end. All they were was killing level 100 mobs in the various Apexis zones. There was no daily quest or quest line involving them. It was just go here and kill these dudes until you hit Exalted. The rewards were pretty stale and unimaginative too. For each rep, you had a garrison follower, a bad trinket, a battle pet, a tabard, a vanity toy, and a reskin of a mount. plus some other miscellaneous junk. There were a couple of deviations to this, like the Laughing Skull for Horde got a cosmetic headpiece, which I absolutely love, and I have it transmogged on my main, and the Shatari Defensive for Alliance got a plate transmog set, but for the majority it was just copy and paste. The only truly fleshed out rep was the Steam Weedle Preservation Society, where you had to run around and find rare elites to hunt in Nagrand, which was pretty fun, and much less grindy, even though the rewards were the same. The mounted combat system in Nagrand made it a really fun challenge to solo the rares. As for the legendary questline, it was just the same as in MOP. Just a time-gated questline where you collect X items from X dungeon or raid boss, and at the end you get an X power increase to your arbitrary epic and eventually legendary gear piece. The heroic dungeons, however, were pretty great. I felt that most of them aesthetically were claustrophobic, and the environments were forgettable with the exception of the Everbloom and the Iron Docks. But mechanically, they were solid. Tough enough to have to think about mechanics like interrupting, target switching, stunning, etc., and maybe have a wipe or two, but easy enough to beat when using the Dungeon Finder without too much frustration, putting to use the mechanics taught by the Proving Grounds, which were mandatory for heroics. Eventually raids were released and the gear made the dungeons face roll easy, one overgeared tank or DPS, but the dungeons served their purpose until then. It's not a perfect system, but it worked. I feel that I should talk more about the Garrison system. The option to create your own unique garrison was a novelty that quickly wore off. Initially, the idea of having so many customizable buildings was cool, but after being level 100 for a month, almost all of them became redundant. They offered rewards and benefit that you either didn't need or were available through much more lucrative means. There are some exceptions like the War Mill / Dwarven Bunker, or an Enchanting Hut, but you had 7 building slots to fill, not including the secondary profession buildings. So most of my characters I just found myself filling slots for the sake of it, or just not filling them at all. The mission system was entertaining for the first few weeks as well. After all, some of the rewards were fantastic. But after that, it just became something that you felt like you had to do, even if realistically you didn't. Within the first few months of WoD, the Master Plan add-on became the most downloaded add-on in the game, as it completely removed any thought or time invested into your Garrison follower missions. So what we ended up with was most players logging in at the start of the day, churning out all their missions, and then logging off until raid night. I'm not saying that Master Plan was a bad thing. I think it was bad that a system was implemented that spawned an add-on like Master Plan and made it so popular. Finally, after 3 weeks of grueling anticipation, no pun intended, the raids are available. Heimel and then later Blackrock Foundry. How were they? Now, this is when my opinion takes over, but if Warlords of Draenor was the expansion of anything, it was the expansion of raiding. The general consensus across the PvE community was that Heimel and BRF were solid raids. With the exception of some obvious filler bosses like Kargath Bladefist and Flamebender Kagraz, all of the bosses were unique and memorable, from Tectus' Pandemonium to Imperator Margot's length and plot twist final phase. There was Blast Furnace and its unique take on control fight, and then Operator Thogar, dubbed the Train Boss. There were some pretty absurd class mechanics throughout Tier 17, particularly Fire Mages double stacking Ignite with their 2-piece bonus, going from one of the worst specs in the game to the best. We also had Demo Warlocks turning ad fights into patchwork, and Boomkins simultaneously creating and filling a niche in the same raid. But all in all, every class had a place in high-end raiding. Sure, some had it easier than others, but generally the balance was pretty stable, until you got to Blackhand Mythic. You just got 9 out of 10 Mythic? Nice! I hope you have 3 Hunters, 2 Boomkins, 2 Warlock, a Brewmaster Tank, a Disc Priest, 2 Rogues, and you better not be a Feral Druid, Hunter Chain, Repel, and DPS Warrior or Death Knight. Good luck! Garrison tweaks. The final content patch of the expansion. Tanan Jungle, Hellfire Citadel, Time Walking Dungeons, and most importantly of all, Apex's Crystals. Tanan Jungle was the Warlord's equivalent to the Time Missile, filled with welfare epics, exploration, reputation, rare mobs, treasures. Yeah, it was pretty much exactly the same thing. Just replaced Timeless Coins with Apex's Crystals. But for some reason, even though Time Missile was received very positively by the community, Tanan Jungle wasn't. Why? Well, to be honest, I think it was mainly bitterness, that after less than a year we were already at the final patch of the expansion. And all we got was the bread and butter, a new raid, and a reskinned Time Missile. We also got the Shipyard, the reincarnation of the Garrison mission system, but this time better. Why? Because instead of one overabundant resource, we have 2 overabundant resources. Instead of missions disappearing when you fail them, your followers disappear when you fail them. the only plausible reason I can think of as to why the shipyard system was implemented is that it was already finished, and almost all the other content coming in this patch was already tied to the shipyard, so it couldn't just be replaced with another piece of content in time. There's not really much to say about Hellfire Citadel. It followed up from Tier 17 as being a stellar raid. Some of the bosses come to mind as filler or letdowns just like Tier 17, particularly Kilrog Deadeye, who was featured in the patch trailer. He was on the word loading screen, we had a Lords of War episode about him, he was mysterious, with barely any mention at all. Until now. And well, barely any mention afterwards as well. There wasn't much to know about him, and likewise in Hellfire Citadel, he just fell over, and his mechanics paled in comparison to bosses like Sokrothar the Eternal, who was average at best. Some of the great bosses, however, were Gorefiend, Zul-Harak, Manaroth, and of course, Archimonde. Gorefiend Mythic being one of my favourite encounters of all time. The scaled eye-level loot system really soured my taste of Hellfire Citadel though. It was a fix to a system that wasn't broken, but ironically made it worse. The problem was that you now had items in the raid that were best in slot for everyone who could use them, regardless of stats, and often this would end up being counterproductive to your gameplay. It was very common for someone to take an item that had terrible secondary stats over an item with your best in slot stats, but it would be an upgrade because it had +5 agility or intellect or strength, and your gameplay would end up suffering because you were lacking that key stat that your class was built around, like multi-strike, crit, haste. We kind of got this thing out of nowhere. It was just expected to be the flying patch, and funnily enough it had more content in it than 6.1, with additions to the time walking system, a revamp of Mythic Dungeon loot, and the oh so joyous return of Valor points. Why are we excited about this again? I never remember being excited about earning my Valor cap each week. What's different this time? Oh. So, instead of earning my 1k Valor that's allotted to me each week, I can spend 6 to 7 hours doing content that's completely relevant to me and get up to 4.7k Valor in a week. Well, it's not like I have anything better to do. I think Blizzard still underestimate that the players are their own worst enemy, particularly in the mid to high end PvE community. If you put a huge power increase on the end of a stick and say, you can have it, but only if you spend the next 20 hours collecting Murloc fins in Darkshore, people will do it. And they won't do it reasonably, they'll spend the next 20 hours in Darkshire collecting Murloc fins. It's a good thing that time gating exists. Think of how horrible the legendary questline would have been if you weren't locked out to getting runes or stones from bosses once a week. Regardless, at the end of the day, that's not who this patch was designed for. 6.2.3 was basically a patch designed to make gear more accessible to the people who hardly or didn't raid at all, so that they could go into Hellfire Citadel and get a chance at killing Heroic Archimonde to get the new mount he dropped. And kudos to Blizz for doing that. As a raider, I'm always up to bringing fresh new blood to the scene. I realised that as this video went on, it got pretty ranty, and I think writing the script has made me jaded, which is a great analogy for WoD. We started off fantastically, people were hype, they hated mob and they wanted a fresh new expansion to get their teeth into. Like I said, the leveling and post 100 experience was really good in the gap between hitting level 100 and the new raids being released. After that though, things became redundant very quickly. Blizzard put all their eggs into one basket, and that's when players reverted into the running theme of WoD, which is log on, Garrison missions, log off. The disappointment of 6.1 being almost devoid of content was probably the nail in the coffin for WoD, even though Blackrock Foundry was released a week before. Given how rushed along the expansion was, it's pretty clear that Blizzard wanted it over and done with too, so that they could get Legion out and hopefully learn from their mistakes, as well as win back a lot of the player base with the return of Illidan. Which explains why so much content like Farallon and the Faction Hubs, Karabor and Bladespire Citadel never saw the light of day. If it makes you feel any better about the huge loss in subs, remember that WoW also had a huge gain in subs at the start of WoD, due to all the PR, and chances are most of the people who quit are the people who joined in WoD in the first place. World of Warcraft will always have a solid player base that stick through it through thick and thin, even if that means quitting during the content drought between expansions, which we're currently in right now, and 5.6 million is still a lot of people. Look on the bright side. We had a much better year than WildStar. I really appreciate you sticking through to the end and hearing what I have to say, and I really enjoyed making this video. Maybe I'll make more, maybe I won't. But either way, thanks for watching, and take care.